And so now it's my pleasure to introduce Leslie Manookian. You may know her as the founder and president of the Health Freedom Defense Fund. She is a wonderful advocate for health freedom and autonomy. She's had many successes against, for example, the CDC mask mandate on airplanes. Leslie and her team were crucial to getting that overturned. People, yes. They've also had other successes too. She's just a wonderful person. You can read more about her in the bio in the program, but what you might not know is that she is a wakeboard surfer. Do you know about this new sport? People are wakeboarding. They're wake surfing. Is it called wake surfing? Off the back of boats. So they're not surfing on the waves like in California, Pacific Ocean. They are letting a boat pull them and they just surf the wake. And Leslie is so good, she can deck start, which means she just kind of jumps off with the rope, tosses the rope aside, and then is surfing. Let's give this wonderful, multi-talented woman a hand. Leslie Manookian.
That was funny, Hilda. I just learned to do that this year, so that's kind of a big deal for me. My 23-year-old son's very impressed. So, in 2020, we didn't have our conference. In 2021, we did get to have our conference. And I spoke at that conference, and as many of you may recall, I talked about what was going on and why. Meaning what's going on in the world, why was the COVID response the way it was? Why was it so overbearing? Why was it so absurdly intrusive into our lives? And was this just a natural response? You know, why was it so reactionary? Why did it happen all over the world all at once? And I talked about how the real reason is because we need a great reset. And the reason we need a great reset, in particular in Europe, is because Europe is so indebted. It's, the last time I checked, nearly 60 trillion euros of debt for public pensions and public, wow, that really bangs when I say puh. For any kind of liability by the state. And the latest data that I saw is that if you look at Europe, 80% of the public liability is, or 80% of the pensions are public, meaning that they are paid by the government. And the governments of Europe got themselves into a huge hole because the European Central Bank went to negative interest rates for 8 years from 2014 till about 2022. And what that did was destroy the bond markets, because who's going to buy a bond when you have to pay to own it? And it also destroyed the pension markets. And now there's a major problem because there's actually a lot of social unrest because the pensions need to be cut. You have a population problem, not enough younger people. You have these state-sponsored pension programs and an aging population, and they've destroyed the pension market and the bond market. The largest owner of bonds in Europe is the European Central Bank itself. So they don't really have anywhere to turn. And this is why Europe is pushing so hard, in fact, some might say agitating for war. And if you look at many of the things that Europe has done in the last few years, it doesn't make sense unless, of course, you're trying to create an excuse to reset the economy, which means defaulting on the debt. This is why they're pushing programs like universal basic income and all these kinds of things. So I talked a lot about that, and I went through much detail on it. Things have only advanced since then. But before I go into more detail on that, I want to just talk about the great reveal that's been happening. And to me, I mean, how many, I want to just ask, this should be an interesting, how many of you trust the government? Does anybody really trust their government? Oh, come on, Sarita. Okay, you trust them to lie. Okay, perfect. But how many of you would have said that in 2019? Sure, some of you, but not all of you. Nobody raised a hand this time, whereas some of you would have been like, yeah, you know, to some extent, right? They have destroyed all credibility, and this is part and parcel of the agenda to destroy Western civilization from the inside out, because you can't impose a global New World Order if you do it from outside. If you push from the outside, Americans will unite. We will defend ourselves, but if you slowly, insidiously do it over a period of time by cancel culture and a culture of siloing us into our own echo chambers and all these kinds of things, then you're going to actually erode society, right? We talk about today boys and girls sports. Thankfully, that's being addressed, but this is insanity, right? It would have never happened when I was a child. But this whole thing about trust is huge, because they have to get us to not trust our government so that we will actually call for its demise ourselves. And whenever you see something going on in the world, I really beg you to ask yourself, if it was the other side of the aisle doing it, how would you feel? This is how they play the game, right? Why did so many conservatives go along with Trump on Operation Warp Speed? Had Obama or Biden done it, they probably wouldn't have been quite as accepting. And in the same way, this administration is pushing a lot of things that those same conservatives wouldn't be happening about. Think about Obama. He bombed innocent people. Well, he denied American citizens due process by bombing them in Yemen, right? He droned them and killed families and their kids. That's outrageous. But the Trump administration is bombing boats in Venezuela and now allegedly preparing for a land invasion orchestrated by the CIA. My point is that when we buy into this whole divide, it's easy to lose our objectivity and our own filter. Like, we really need to think critically about all of these things, whether it's coming from our side or the other side. You look at health agencies, and this is one of the best things that's happened in my mind in the last 5 years, is that people have stopped trusting the health authorities. And there's a lot of reason. It's been going on for decades, and yet people have just gone along with it. Like, think about x-rays, thalidomide, all of these things that have been pushed on people in the past, and we're told that they're perfectly safe, only to find out that they're incredibly dangerous. Same thing, of course, with the COVID shots. Or Vioxx. Vioxx was only, 20, 25 years ago. What's interesting is that it wasn't just the pharmaceutical industry, but the health agencies that were colluding with the pharmaceutical company to conceal the problems. And Merck actually said that they were going to isolate and silence those who were speaking out. And then they said, if that fails, we will seek them out, hunt them down where they live. This has been going on for 20 years. And so people like me who've been investigating this stuff for a long time know this, but the average person doesn't until the last 5 years. So this is like what's happened in the last 5 years, as horrific as it's been, has been the greatest reveal, and in some ways precipitated the greatest awakening that's happened, certainly in the history of our country. And that's something that we should all be applauding. We think about saturated fat, butter, seed oils, the food pyramid, antibiotics, all these things we've been told, and everybody here knows that these are things that we shouldn't be trusting the government on. But now it's becoming widespread in the public domain, and that's fantastic. That makes me so happy. We're being pushed, psychiatric medications right now. And I just read about a study that was done in the 1970s, which was really fascinating. How many people think that addiction is just some biochemical disruption in our system? A lot of people believe that, right? Well, they did a study and they took lab animals, rats, and they put a rat in a cage with water and a water containing cocaine. And the rat, not surprisingly, only drank the cocaine water. But the researcher thought, you know what? Is that what's really going on here, or is it something else at play? And so he put the rat in a cage with a bunch of other rats, with lots of colorful things and balls and toys and treadmills and things to play with. and food and things to nibble on. And guess how many of the rats drank the cocaine water? None. None. Because it's really about isolation. It's about community. It's about being connected to our peers. And this is one of the things that they really, I think, was one of the most cruel parts of COVID, was this isolation that they perpetrated on us and that so many people bought into. You know, I never bought into it. People would come to my house and I would invite them over and I would open the door and they would be standing back. And I would go out to them and just give them a hug. And I'm telling you, they all cried because they were so desperate for this connection, right? And so, biggest message, question everything, right? So let's go back to what's going on. We are in the midst of what I believe is the greatest transition, certainly of the last several hundred years. There's an attempt to reset the system towards a globalist new world order, and I think it's our job to redirect the tree that's falling. I don't think we can stop that there is going to be massive change. We cannot stop the AI and the data centers and the digital IDs and all these things. We can't. But what we can do is to work in our own backyards, in our own communities, in our own states to make a difference. And this is what we did with the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, which I'll get to in a few minutes. So if you look what's going on, there's this war against cash. We've got cancel culture, censorship, deplatforming, although apparently YouTube yesterday restored a bunch of people's accounts. My account and our Greater Good account was canceled ages ago. I haven't gone on to see if we've gotten it back, but apparently this is happening. And this is only because I think they know that we know what's going on, and so they're trying to kind of create a semblance of stability when things are very, very close to erupting. We've got rising crime, we have a lack of social cohesion, and then you've got all this digital stuff. This stuff is not going to go away. We can't make it go away. This is just, the question to me is, how do we use it? How do we harness it to use it for the good of humanity rather than against us? And I think that's possible. My son is 23 and he just started his first kind of real job after college. And he and all of his peers, some of them are going into pre-med, some of them are going into banking, they're going into all these things. And when I try to say to him, you know, oh, we should get them not to do that. They should become homeopaths or they should become some kind of a holistic practitioner. He says, Mom, we need good people in all these fields. And he's right, because we can utilize these tools for the good. They don't have to only be used for bad. And that's the opportunity that faces all of us today. So going back to what's going on in the whole state of play today, Britain just announced a digital ID. You will not be able to work by 2029 without Britain's digital ID. So they're pushing this. And then the conservative leader of Alberta, Canada, just announced the Alberta wallet. It's a digital wallet, and the first thing that they're going to put in there for you is your health card. So you're going to have a digital ID in order to have your digital wallet, and you're going to put your medical card in there, and then their plan is for all your other government documents, what's going to come with that? Your banking, your employment. This is moving. So what do we do about this? This is moving in certain countries. Over 2 million people signed petitions in Britain to try and stop it. I don't know what the state of play is in the last couple of weeks. These things I think we can resist. What's going on in Asia is that in Vietnam, they actually confiscated 86 million bank accounts of people who would not submit their biometrics. So you don't want to give them your fingerprints, your irises, your face. They just confiscated it, 86 million. In Thailand, they took, I think it was about 3.5 million bank accounts for the same reasons. But you know what happened? They debanked all these people. Like anybody who listened to Samantha Bailey this morning, her credit card and her debit cards were frozen. She went to the bank and they had completely confiscated her account, the government. It shut it down. She couldn't do anything. Well, what's happened in Vietnam as a result of in Thailand, as a result of 3.5 million, the confiscating of these bank accounts, is that many establishments will no longer take any kind of credit card. No plastic. They are insisting on cash. Isn't that fantastic? I mean, so this is one of the many things that we can do to try and protect ourselves. Make a commitment that you're going to use cash at least once a week, if not more. Do your best. It's got to be concerted, because you know what? It actually takes time to go to the bank. I know it does, or the ATM, and get your money out, but do it, because that is our safeguard against ultimate tyranny. We're not going to get rid of the digital stuff. It's going to happen, but we can have both. And as long as we have both, they can't completely control us. They can't completely enslave us. In the United States, President Trump, his first full day in office, he had Sam Altman, Larry Ellison of Oracle, and a representative of SoftBank of Japan come to the White House and talk about how they're going to invest $500 billion in the next 4 years in infrastructure for AI and data centers. They're only doing that for one reason. That's because they are driving this, they want to drive us all into this digital age. And there's President Trump, celebrating the whole thing and how great these guys are. These guys are like lizard people in my view, but so you've got that happening. And there's a huge push. And there are data centers now all over the country. They're actually, I think it's one of the reasons why Bill Gates is buying up all of the farmland, because he wants the water that's underneath it, the water rights that go with it. Because these facilities use enormous amounts of water. Or the Greenland facility, I think that one of the reasons that they want, that Trump has talked about taking Greenland, is because it's cold. It's a good place to put data centers because it keeps them cool. And they've got unbelievable amounts of minerals underneath the ice, rare earth minerals. The Real ID, that's moving forward in this country. It's not stopped, but I think that we can push back against it on a state level. But if you look, Kristi Noem, the Department of Homeland Security Secretary, she's out there doing all these, ads about how great it is. And then E-Verify to control our borders, right? Well, this is how they make us think that they're doing good, because they're doing it to control illegal immigration, allegedly, but it actually normalizes the idea of digital identification for everybody. JP Morgan just announced that at their New York headquarters, in order to get in the door, they're saying it's in response to the shooting of that United Healthcare? I think the insurance company. Remember the guy was murdered in cold blood last year? They say it's in response to that. They want to be safe. Everyone has to use biometrics to get in the door. No exceptions. So tens of thousands of employees that work in there are now going to have to submit their biometrics. And you imagine, you're like 25 years old, you have this great job, well-paying. Are you going to resist? So we're not going to be able to resist. We have to control what's done with our data. And I'll get to what I think some of the possible solutions are. Pfizer. A week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, maybe now, it's been, President Trump had Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer, to come to the White House and announce this $70 billion deal. It was two parts. One is that Pfizer is going to get tariff relief in exchange for investing $70 billion in infrastructure for manufacturing in the United States. And their goal is to produce more cancer treatments and better vaccines. That's their goal. And they're getting tariff relief for doing this. But what are they really pushing? They're going to be pushing mRNA. That's what this is about. And they want to make sure that they are doing it in the United States so they don't have to pay tariffs for it. There are those who say that this is keeping your enemies close. I think this is horrific. I don't know how people can try and spin it in a positive way. This person signed, Bourla made countries all over the world sign non-disclosure agreements and secret contracts which actually secured their purchase of COVID shots with their own national assets. They were secret. They did this in the run-up to the COVID shot rollout. And now there are many, many estimates about how many people were injured and killed by the shots. The latest research is that they're causing cancer, that they had a net effect of death, that's actually continuing, and yet we're welcoming into the White House to do this special deal with him. This has to be resisted. These pharmaceutical companies are clearly somehow involved with what's going on in the White House, and they're clearly not our friends. So something happened to us a couple of months ago, which is that we had, many years ago, we had filed suit against the Los Angeles Unified School District together with California Educators for Medical Freedom, which is a employee group of the school district. And we lost at the district court. We argued that the COVID shots were personal medical interventions, and therefore a private matter because they didn't stop transmission or infection. And so it was a private matter that could not be mandated by the school district. And we lost at the district court because the judge in the court, Judge Dale Fisher, said that a lawsuit from 1905, a Supreme Court case called Jacobson versus Massachusetts, is what controls here. The problem is that Jacobson versus Massachusetts pertained to smallpox, not COVID, and it was a vaccine. I'm not going to talk about that I think that the vaccine was an unmitigated disaster, but they accepted at that point that this shot that had been around for 100 years or that this vaccine that had been around for 100 years was safe and effective at stopping transmission and infection. And on that basis, they said that Pastor Jacobson could refuse the shot for as long as he paid a $5 fine. It didn't say, court did not say that your participation in normal life could be conditioned on receipt of this vaccination. Didn't say that you could be fired from the school district. Didn't say that you could be excluded from campus or anything else. But that lawsuit from 1905 has been misconstrued for 120 years to say that the state has the power and authority to mandate vaccinations on the public. And we sued over that. The district court upheld the school district's mandate, and then we appealed to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Ninth Circuit overturned it. And we were celebrating because the opinion was a scathing opinion decrying the abuse of Jacobson and how outrageous it is. And that if the shot doesn't stop transmission or infection, then where is the line between public health and private health? And I think this is one of the most pernicious problems that we face as a nation, is that this whole notion of public health has crept into the private domain. They have forgotten that public health should be about the commons. It should be about making sure that our streets are clean, that companies aren't discharging effluent into our rivers and streams or chemicals and toxins into our air. It doesn't mean they should be dictating personal medical choices, but it's what they've been sort of pushing towards. So the Ninth Circuit overturned it, and then the school district did what's called petition the court for an en banc review, meaning a broader panel of judges of the Ninth Circuit. And it was very strange because this was granted in about 6 months, but then we went in March and we held oral argument in front of the Ninth Circuit 11 judge panel. And it was amazing. We thought for sure we had 6 or 8 judges on our side. Our counsel did an absolutely fantastic job of explaining the difference between the misapplication of Jacobson in this case and in all these other cases, but also explaining that in the context, if you look back to 1905, all of us women couldn't vote. There were Jim Crow laws in place. Why are we allowing this lawsuit from way back then to dictate what's legal today? And he closed with Buck v. Bell. Buck v. Bell was the case, I think it was around 1920, in which Oliver Wendell Holmes, a Supreme Court justice, said that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough in holding that it was acceptable for the state to snip the fallopian tubes, sterilize women it deemed unsuitable for procreating. That's still statute today, or it's still rather, that case has never been overturned, amazingly. It's still around today. I don't think any of us would think that that's an acceptable lawsuit, and yet this kind of stuff from over 100 years ago is still dictating. So we filed this lawsuit in order to push the Supreme Court to, at the very least, clarify that a shot must stop transmission or infection, but hopefully to reconcile it with all of this jurisprudence that's existed in the last 40 or 50 years. There have been at least half a dozen cases, it may be closer to a dozen now, that have determined that each and every one of us has the right to make our own medical choices, that we have a liberty interest in doing so, and that we can refuse unwanted medical interventions even if they might save our lives. So there's this conflict between this Jacobson versus Massachusetts in 1905 and all the more recent jurisprudence, and we want the court to say, you know, let's just let Jacobson go. So in July 31st, we got the ruling back from the court saying that that they had overturned their own smaller panel decision and that the district court was right and they were dismissing the case. And the court actually said, it doesn't matter whether the COVID shot stopped transmission or infection. All that matters is that the school board could have believed that it would help individual employees. This is so dangerous, right? This opens the door, and it's exactly what we argued, is that if that's true, then we are mere chattel. We are literally slaves to the state, if that's true, because they can dictate any medical intervention they want under the pretext of public health. You know what? You're not cheery enough when you go grocery shopping. We think you should take some, I don't know, Paxil or something, right? You need to take something that makes you a little bit more ebullient. Or you're not as focused as you could be at work. So we are going to mandate that everybody takes ADD meds so that it improves your productivity. This is insanity, but this is where it's going. And if you look at Borla from Pfizer, he has spoken repeatedly about chipping medicines. So they have the capacity now to tag an individual pill or capsule with some kind of a chip that when you swallow, they will be able to monitor it and know that you've taken it. And you know what he says this is for? To ensure compliance. Right? So can you imagine how incredibly terrifying this ruling is from the Ninth Circuit, which is the largest circuit in this country, combined with this kind of compliance and all of the truly dystopian objectives of the New World Order and the World Economic Forum? This is terrifying, and it has to be stopped, and we can do so in certain ways. So if you look at this case, it opens the door to essentially unfettered power for any state entity. But it also, by extension, may do that for private employers. Hopefully not, but that's where it's going. We intend to appeal this to the Supreme Court. And so we will be issuing some letters to the editors. So this is literally my biggest nightmare, right? I mean, I have for 20 years been fighting for individual rights and freedoms, and I can't think of anything more horrific. When I read this ruling, I was literally outraged. The court didn't even address any of the arguments that we had made, all the constitutional arguments, all the more recent Supreme Court cases. They just completely ignored them in one sentence. That was it. This was clearly, in my view, a very political ruling. We got the ruling in 3 months. Usually it takes 9 to 12 months from the Ninth Circuit to get some kind of a decision. 3 months. And you know what? I had thought that we had at least 6 to 8 of the judges based on the oral argument and how happy we were afterwards and how dejected LAUSD's attorneys were. We got the ruling 8-2. There was one other who was kind of in the middle. He agreed on one thing and not another. But none of those 8 judges who signed on to the concurrence signed on to the majority opinion wrote a concurrence. So a concurrence is what judges write when they want to say, yes, we agree with all this in the majority, but we would add this and we would add that. It's right in all these different ways. Not a single judge wanted to go on the record in an official concurrence to that opinion. That, in my view, speaks volumes. Now, Judge Collins, he was in our original panel, and Judge Lee was not in our original 3-judge panel, but they wrote a dissent which essentially argued all of our points. And in the end, what they wrote was that they were basically giving the government a blank check to make policy that pertains to every single person in this country when they should be constraining government's power given how much had been abused. So we're going to submit a petition in early December, and I hope that all of you will be praying for it, because the Supreme Court usually only takes fewer than 1% of all petitions every year. But this issue is so important, and what's happened is that the Ninth Circuit has actually lowered the bar now. You know, they have actually said that it doesn't even matter if it stops transmission or infection. No other court has ever said that in 120 years. So if this stands, this is actually a new precedent that, even though it's only in the Ninth Circuit, will be referred to, it will be referenced by all the other circuits in the country. And let's just say, this is really terrifying. So I'm very hopeful they'll take it. I think with all the information that's coming out of the Department of, HHS at this point, and all the science that's coming out, there's been a study out of Korea showing that there was a very significant elevation in the number of cancers in people who took the COVID shots versus those who didn't. It's not a perfect study, but it's very concerning. And you look at what's happening with the increase in excess deaths all across the Western world, and we have a problem. And I think this is becoming much more part of the kind of, conversation on a national level, and all but a small percentage of people are now starting to ask questions. I saw a poll not long ago that 60% of parents believe that the vaccine schedule should be studied better. And that's a huge shift. Just in 2019, it was probably 20 or 30%. So this is a huge shift. We're seeing this everywhere. So this is something that's really important to understand, that we've got the media against us, you've got courts against us, we've got the corporations against us, you certainly have factions in the government against us. If you look at the politicians, on the one side, they are fighting against more information and transparency about vaccines. That's the Democrats. And on the other side, the Republicans are fighting to give a liability shield to the pesticide manufacturers so you can't sue them the same way you can't sue the vaccine industry. So, we have our work cut out for us, but there are huge things that we can do. So I think that everything that we really need and want to do is mostly at the state level. Congressman Paul Gosar of Arizona about a month ago introduced a bill that would strip the liability portion of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act from 1986. That is something huge that we should all be applauding. It would also remove the statute of limitations so that anybody who's been injured by the vaccine can sue. Right now, it's 3 years for a regular vaccine, and it's only 1 year for the countermeasures, which is anything that was given under the PrEP Act. So this would be huge. Will it get through? I mean, it's a bit of a long shot, but it's fantastic that this is becoming a part of our national dialogue. But I don't think the people in D.C. are going to save us. What I do know is that people in our local areas, many more of them are on our side than we realize. Many more of them. So last year, having watched what happened during COVID, I was incredibly disheartened by it all. But I really truly believed that they had overshot the normal bounds of societal discretion by engaging in such egregious acts, masking our little babies, closing down our schools, mandating these shots for children or pushing the shots on children, even approving them for children and babies is insane. It was so bad, so egregious that a lot of people, like I asked at the very beginning, started to wake up and they're asking questions now. And, this is so important because we tend to think that people in government, whether it's the federal level or the state level or local level, are against us. And we forget that those people have loved ones who died in the hospital alone, or who were forced to get a shot and now are paralyzed or having seizures or something like that in order to work their job. We don't know about these things. Well, last year, a year and a half ago, I was just so outraged and so fired up, I decided that I had to do something about it. And so something that's been in the works in my heart for the last 15 years is legislation that would prohibit medical mandates in my state, in the state of Idaho. And there had been a bill passed in 2023 called the Coronavirus Stop Act. And so I thought, you know what? I'm going to take that bill and I will adapt it. I'll have to make a lot of changes to it, but they've already voted and passed in the state of Idaho that you can't mandate a COVID shot for anybody. Not a public, no public entity can, no private entity can, no school for any reason. Only hospitals, hospital employees, which is awful. We're going to try and fix this. But that was because of a Supreme Court case. So they basically took care of this for the COVID shots. And I reasoned, well, if they did it for the COVID shots, why can't they do it for every single medical intervention that we could ever think of? And so I met with a Idaho state senator who later betrayed me, I will say that, but I spoke with him for about an hour and a half on the phone, and with one of my dear friends and colleagues, Misty Karlfeld of Health Freedom Idaho. Yeah, she's awesome. And at the end of it, he said, I love the idea, I think it's great. He's like, you write the bill, if I like it, I will sponsor it. So I literally hung up the phone and started writing the bill. And my vision is this. We've been told, the Public Health Services Act was in 1942. I think it was 1942, or was it 45? It was in the 40s. It was in the midst of the World War. Isn't that kind of bizarre? How many think that that's kind of a weird time to be issuing this kind of landmark legislation, which is going to change the United States? That's when they did it, when everybody's focused on something else, right? Whenever there's shock and awe, folks, look the other direction. I beseech you. So anyway, up until that point, no one had really thought about intruding into our individual private lives. And in fact, the way that we stopped the mask mandate on airplanes, trains, and buses was by arguing that the federal government doesn't have that power or authority, because it doesn't. Because the police powers in the Constitution are reserved to the states, and chief amongst the police powers are the health powers. It's very, very clear. And so, in fact, somebody told me yesterday, someone with the 10th Amendment Center, Mike Bolton, that there's a lawsuit, Supreme Court case from 1828 that says very, very specifically in every way that you can imagine that health rights are the state's rights, and that those cannot be contravened. So that's what we argued in our case, and that's why we won. And that's why I decided we have got to take this fight to the states, because that's how we're going to make a difference. Those people live in our communities, especially if you live in a smaller state, right? If you live in California, I'm so sorry. That's all I can say. Or New York. I'm always telling people to move. When people ask me, what do we do in California? I'm like, move to Texas, not Idaho. Move to Texas. No. Where I'm going is that in the last 100 years, there has been this huge push towards collectivism. And this started in 1913 when the Federal Tax Act was passed. Okay? 16th Amendment, it's okay for you to be taxed individually. Before that, it wasn't. They wrote a loophole in there that private family foundations, the super wealthy, could grow their money tax-free in these private foundations doing good. What did they really do with it? Most people don't know this, but the Reese Committee investigated the activities of these foundations in, I think it was the late 50s or early 60s. I'm pretty sure it was the early 60s. And what they found was that they went and met. There was a guy named Norman Dodd who's an attorney, and he was appointed by Congressman Reese to go and investigate. And what he found, they actually told him, the heads of the foundations, he said, what do you guys, what's your objective here? And they were like, really, honestly? He said, yeah, what are you guys trying to achieve? To install collectivism in America. That was 60 years ago. And this push has been going on since 1913. And so my point is, all of the things that you hear about, we never signed the Nuremberg Code, which rejected utilitarianism, right? That it's never moral or ethical to sacrifice one in service to the greater good. That's why we called our film The Greater Good. It's funny, some people actually believe that we meant that seriously, that we were endorsing the greater good rather than, casting aspersions on it. But my point is that our society has been moving further and further and further towards very loose, ill-defined definitions of truth, very loose, ill-defined understandings about what our responsibilities are as citizens of this country. That's been happening all over the world. I've lived abroad for 11 years of my life, and I can tell you that the other countries in the West are way further down this track than we are. It's really terrifying and sad. But we all know, those of us who are a little bit older know that this kind of dialogue has been, think about COVID. What did they say? Don't be a grandma killer. Do the right thing. It's a small ask, wear a mask, all of these kinds of things. It's all about collectivism. It's not about what's best for you. The whole thing about the entire argument surrounding vaccines is that you're supposed to do it in order to protect those who can't be vaccinated. Well, at first they said it was just that you had to do it because of herd immunity. But when we pushed back and said, well, actually herd immunity is a myth, it's an illusion, it doesn't exist with vaccinations, you have primary and secondary vaccine failure. 7% of people who get the measles shot will never mount an antibody response, leaving aside the fact that antibodies don't equate to immunity. Let's just be very clear on that. And then there's what's called secondary failure, whereby any protection induced by the shot initially wanes very quickly. With pertussis shots, within 4 years, 20% of people have any kind of antibody response, a proxy for immunity. Most people have none. But we've been told that this is going to, it's the right thing, we need to protect everybody, it's herd immunity and all this stuff. And when we started pointing out all of these failures, literally, if you type in pertussis vaccine failure, you'll find a dozen articles and papers all about it. They just don't tell the public. When we started pointing this out, then they shifted the goalpost. It's for those who can never get a shot. It's for the immunocompromised. That's why you have to do it. It's for babies who aren't protected yet because they can't get the shot. They just keep moving it and moving it and moving it. So let me just ask you all, who in this room believes it's okay to light one child on fire in order to keep the other one warm? Who thinks it's okay to tie one up in order to protect someone else? Evil is evil, whether it happens one time or 1,000 times. And this is what I argued when I presented my bill to the committees in Idaho. So it's taken me a while to get to this. I've been investigating vaccines since 2001, and The Greater Good came out in 2011. There was a time when I used to believe that we just needed transparency, we needed everybody to be able to make their choice, we need freedom. And I've gotten to the point where it's very clear to me that, and I say this all the time, health does not come in a pill, bottle, cream, or injection. It doesn't. It's not in a syringe. It's nowhere else. We all know this. It comes from exercise and sunshine and eating well, nutrient-dense food, and community and happiness and joy and meaning in our lives. That rat in the 1970s told us exactly what is true, that we need each other, we need meaning, we need fun, we need joy, we need honesty, integrity, and truth. And that is what the Idaho Medical Freedom Act is all about, making sure that you get to choose who you rely on, because I don't think any bureaucrat or expert in Washington, D.C. has any right to tell you what to do, nor do they have a corner on the market of truth. So we live amidst this incredibly terrifying time, but also this incredibly promising time. And if you see what's happening on the national level, there are some very good things happening with HHS revealing truth about drugs and vaccines, and I think there's much more to come. There's going to be very positive guidance on the food pyramid or the food guidelines, so many things like this. There's a huge effort now to try and revitalize our rural communities by helping educate about diabetes and what contributes to that. One of our chapter leaders has been doing work on that. I've been working with her to try and bring this into Idaho and elsewhere. There's some fantastic things happening. But as I've said over and over again, we have to solve this at the state level. And so I wrote this bill because I have gotten to the point, I actually spoke with a journalist from ProPublica in the last couple of weeks. She's writing a hit piece on me, all about the Medical Freedom Act. And she said, so, you know, you don't trust the media, you don't trust the government, and you don't trust the corporations. Like, I just don't understand. And I said, well, when I was working on Wall Street, I had the CEO of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world tell me that his new drug that was coming out onto the market, the reason that we owned his stock, he knew would kill a few people. It already killed a few people on the clinical trial. But hey, we're still going to do $7 billion in peak sales, and so I should be happy. I told her that, and she was sort of like, very quiet. And then I talked to her about, she literally doesn't understand that the government lied about masks, lied about distancing, lied about the shots. It's unbelievable. So I've got the corporations, I've got the government. Who am I missing? Oh, the media. And so then I told her many stories about how I had had all these experiences with the media, with me basically engaging them in an interview in good faith and then them just lying. That's what happened to us when we first put out the Greater Good in New York. We did a premiere at the Angelica Film Festival in 2011 in, I think, August or September, and the New York Times wrote utter lies about us. And so we said, who wrote this? And then they literally put on their online that we had complained in order to make it look like we were disgruntled filmmakers rather than they lied. Anyway, so I explained these things to her and she couldn't understand it. She just still, couldn't believe it. But if there's one thing I know, it's that I am not free if I have freedom of speech, but not freedom to direct my medical care. Who cares what you can say if someone else can force you to put something into your body against your will in order to live a normal life? Who cares? This is the most fundamental. In fact, I think it's so fundamental, that's the reason it's not in the Bill of Rights. Because I don't think anybody ever really seriously contemplated this kind of intrusion by business, government, education. Nobody did. So I wrote the Medical Freedom Act. This is how the Medical Freedom Act, the model, this is a little bit better than my original definition because I've worked with some people from Stand for Health Freedom and other organizations to try and perfect this. So medical intervention means a medical procedure, treatment, device, drug, injection, medication, or medical action taken to monitor, diagnose, prevent, treat, or cure a disease or alter the health or biological function of a person. Medical interventions include, but are not limited to, masks, vaccines, biologics, swabs, tests, including genetic and genomic testing. That's been added to the model bill. Pills, capsules, creams, sprays, liquids, injections, chips, devices, monitors, etc. None of those can be mandated in the state of Idaho for any reason in order to engage in normal society. Not to go to school, not to be employed, not to step foot, not to go to court, not to have a job, not to go grocery shopping or go to a concert, for no reason. There's only one carve-out at this point, and that is for healthcare workers, and we're going to address that. But how fabulous is that? It bans all of those. I sobbed literally for days after this passed. So the governor vetoed it the first time. Usually when a governor vetoes a bill, it's over. But you know what happened? Both the Senate and the House brought back a bill. And there were competing bills working through the legislature for the next week to 2 weeks. And ultimately, we were able to get an even better bill than the first bill I wrote, because the bill that we ultimately got said that no healthy, unvaccinated person can be excluded in the event of a disease outbreak. Nowhere in the world does that exist. And it also says that this legislation can never be contradicted in the event of a disease outbreak, in the event of an emergency, that no state entity or state official may promulgate a rule or regulation or issue any statute that contradicts this bill, which means it's pretty much bulletproof. So this, in our circles, was met with, unbelievable excitement and applause. And it was met by the mainstream media with utter silence. Only the Epoch Times did a story on it. No one else. Nobody in the mainstream, it just reflects exactly where we are as a society. But this legislation is so exciting because it very clearly, unequivocally states who holds the power to make our own medical choices. As I testified, so I had the honor and the privilege of presenting the bill and then standing for questions in both the Senate and in the House. And what I did was, explain to them. There was a man who's a dear family friend who was in the back of in the room with me. His employer, he didn't want the shot. His employer said, "I'm bringing people on to the dairy next week in order to give the COVID shots to everybody." The owner had cancer and he wanted all the employees to get the COVID shot. And he's like, "I don't want to get the shot." He said, I'm not getting it. I'm not planning to. Well, Doug, I think you need to get that shot. You need to set a good example for all the 100 people under you. So his boss coerced him. Doug Cameron and my dad had hunted together for a long time. And he'd been a family friend for decades. Well, Doug is now paralyzed from the diaphragm down from a blood clot from that shot and will never walk again. And his boss is dead and gone. So Doug was sitting in that room. He came to every single meeting, every single hearing, and he testified. And the most remarkable thing, however, was that when I started speaking, I expected all this pushback. And you know what happened? Those senators started arguing on my behalf. They did, because they know people. They have family members and friends who've had issues. Pretty much everybody does. So they were arguing for me. It passed the House 2/3, a super majority. It didn't pass the Senate with as much as that, but it still passed by a long shot. And so when the bills came back, we were able to make it even stronger. And then the governor was painted into a box and couldn't do anything. So he signed it reluctantly on the last day of the session. I couldn't believe it. So my message to you, the most important thing that I hope you all take away, is that we actually have way more power than we think, and that if you just believe and put one foot in front of the other, you can achieve great things. Nobody believed this was possible. Even my partners in Idaho. They didn't tell me that at the time, but they were just like, well, we'll just go with it. I never doubted. I never did, because you know why? Because we have what's right on our side. Because we have the moral authority. Because we have what's just and what's true. And that is something that no politician can confront or debate. They can't. And so when you present something that is so common sense about the most basic and fundamental of human rights, the right to determine our own medical interventions, our own medical treatment, they don't really have a comeback. Some of them try and fabricate them. This one woman on the House committee, I think she said, well, what about super lice? I was like, super lice? Apparently, lice has become more robust, more super, because of all of the chemicals and drugs people put on it. And I said, well, there are a lot of ways to get rid of super lice, like homeopathy or essential oils and things like this. You don't have to use a drug. Well, what about conjunctivitis? And I said, well, when my son had conjunctivitis, I cured it overnight with homeopathy. And, they will make up these things. They're like, I said, you just can't dictate. You can send a sick child home, but you can't dictate what the medical treatment would be. How can someone argue against that? Really, truly. We have the moral authority. And I think the problem is that for decades, those of us who've been doing this for a long time have sort of, in some ways, been a little sheepish, a little quiet, like, I don't want to ruffle. I have to be really careful about what I say and what I do. You know what? Damn it. It's never healthy to inject poison into a human being, let alone a baby. And it's never moral to force another human being to risk their health and well-being in service to you or a theoretical good. So my two things are, learn homeopathy. There is nothing that empowers mothers and fathers and individuals more than homeopathy. You can treat almost anything at home with homeopathy, and once you learn it, you don't have fear and you don't have to go to the doctor anymore. You don't have to deal with it. You just don't. That's a fantastic thing. And the next thing is to try to work in your state to make a difference. We have created a model bill and a legislative packet to go along with the bill, and they are posted to our website at healthfreedomdefense.org. If you click on the resources tab, you will find the model bill, and you will also find the legislative packet that's targeted towards the grassroots activists, and there's a packet for legislators. So you basically can take this and run with it. And I am thrilled that we are working with my friends at Stand for Health Freedom, with Leah Wilson and Valerie Borek and Bailey Kuykendall, I think is how you say it. Don't want to butcher that. It's got a lot of vowels and Y's and things in it. But these guys, so we're working, and there are already 5 states that are rolling it out. That's what I've been told. I'm not sure of the 5 states, and I don't want to announce it yet. If you want to know, then email us at info@healthfreedomdefense and info@healthfreedomdefense.org, and we will come back to you. But the first thing you should do is go read the model bill, see how much sense it makes, feel how confident it makes you, and inspired and empowered. Read the legislative packets that explain how to really get up to speed in your state and how to do this, and then share them with your legislators. And the time to be doing that is right now, before the legislative sessions start in the beginning of the year. So I really fully believe that this is how we are going to make sure the tree falls the direction that we want it to go, because this transition is happening whether we like it or not. And then there are other bills that we're going to be bringing in Idaho. We are going to try to label all foods that contain mRNA, be it in the grocery store or the restaurant, anywhere. They have to be labeled so consumers can make a choice. We are going to try and implement a Digital Rights Act. This is how we're going to resolve this. The digital stuff is coming. The question is, how do we control it and actually harness it in service to good? That's what we have to be thinking about, is not trying to stop it, not resist, but literally harness it to our own good. I think that if we do these things, then we have a very, very bright future. And I just look to my son and his friends who are super switched on, super awake, and working as good members of society in these areas, and are going to be accountable. That gives me unbelievable hope and inspiration. And the other thing that gives me all this inspiration is all the legislators who were like nodding and arguing, yeah, they lied to us. They lied to us 98% effective. They lied to us 95%, 90% right. It just went down, 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 down. They lied to us about so many things. People are more awake than you realize. And we have an opportunity today to actually shape the future for our children and our grandchildren and future generations. And it actually, I kind of tear up on this. I look at what Sam and Mark Bailey have been through. If they can do what they have done, we all can surely engage in our states, in our communities, and try and get really good bills passed that serve humanity rather than enslaving us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leslie. So now there is a little bit of time for questions. If you all want to line up here, I'll pass the mic so you can ask your question to Leslie.
I just have to say some words in support of my colleague, Leslie Manookian. She's come so far to be able to do this work, and do you want me to say what you've been through just in one line?
Sure.
She's been through medical hell to get here and do this work. She was vaccine disabled the same year I was, 1996, same month in fact, and she's crawled back out of that health hell to serve all of us with this medical freedom work. Give her another round of applause.
I'll just say to that, Alex, a lot of people don't know that, I've been on the board for the last 5 or 6 years, but I had to step down from my first term on the board because I was so sick I couldn't do it anymore. That's why I stepped back for a few years.
It's a miracle that she's standing here doing this work for us, and she's so effective. You're one of the most effective medical freedom people in the whole movement. Thank you so much. I also want to say that in California is not lost. I lead a medical freedom organization, legal organization in California. We're the leading medical freedom law nonprofit in California. And I'm not going to say the name because I want all the donations to go to you. But it's not lost. We are fighting to change the law in California and federally to do away with mandates entirely. We have a companion case based on Jacobson that is going to go to the Supreme Court as well, most likely. And I think those two cases together will be a force for the Supreme Court and probably do a lot of good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alex.
So to your point about data centers, on the All In podcast, can you hear me?
Could you start again? I couldn't hear the beginning.
To your point about data centers, on the All In podcast, just from yesterday, which is very pro-Silicon Valley, pro-billionaire, they mentioned that a data center was pulled back by Google in Wisconsin based on local concern about power consumption. And then same goes for one by Microsoft and Amazon. And this was just regular folks. And so there's hope for the grassroots kind of thing. So it's more of a comment than a question.
Absolutely.
Leslie, thank you for all that you do. I run an online business, and many of us do. So there's a good chance that I'm going to be shut down. My bank accounts are going to be seized. What can I do to preempt that? How do I protect myself and still be able to say what I need to say?
Well, the good thing is that because of first of all, the Trump administration is committed to free speech. So that's very helpful. The Department of Homeland Security under the Biden administration had deemed anyone who questions the COVID narrative, who questions the COVID shots, who challenges the global warming narrative and things like this, domestic terrorists. Okay? They were domestic threats. And that's been walked back from my understanding. So that's a good thing. As I mentioned, YouTube is reinstating accounts. Twitter, X now, they had canceled my account. They restored it about 2 years ago. But, Elon Musk says he believes in freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. And so my point is that it's very piecemeal. And I think that we do have some support from the administration for freedom of speech, but there's a difference. It's not just freedom of speech, right? You're concerned, I think, about how you're actually able to conduct business. But here's the thing, there are certain platforms, and I think more of them will form. So we actually, as a nonprofit, many nonprofits get deplatformed, not just by the servers that host our websites, but by those who take our donations. So we use a company called Antidote because Antidote doesn't discriminate. Whereas, what is it? There's Give, Send, Go, and what's the other one? GoFundMe. Don't ever use GoFundMe because they literally will confiscate money if it's things that they don't like. They do this. So I think that unfortunately we live in this very polarized world and it's going to become increasingly so. And the beauty of this is that there are organizations springing up to try and serve those of us. There's something called, it's an app and it tells you businesses that never, ever fired employees, discriminated against them, locked them down. What is it called? I have it on my phone. If you wait. I can't look right now because I don't have my phone. It's over there. But there is an app, and I can't think of what it's called right now, but it basically, you can look and you could probably find a business that will serve you. And so this is what I think we need to do. Start a business that actually caters to people who are doing things that other businesses don't like. This is entrepreneurialism, right? And then there are businesses that are actually supporting those, and those of us who do this kind of work. So you have to seek out those platforms. Ask around.
I appreciate what you've done with the Medical Freedom Act in Idaho. I live in Idaho. I teach as a nursing professor at one of the universities. And so I'm very interested in the next steps for that carved out piece of the law. Because my students cannot continue in the nursing program if they're not willing to take a whole myriad of injections. And so I have a student who's more than happy to wonder what we can do to help with the next steps to fill that hole in the current act. I've heard from some people, well, it's probably federal money. There's no way you can really stop that from being mandated, that people would have to take injections. But she and I are interested in helping with whatever the next step is, and I want to know what that is.
Well, first of all, I need you to testify when we bring the bill. We've already got the bill written that actually strikes out the line that says that recipients of CMS funding, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid funding, are exempt. We're striking that line. So we need people like you to testify. That's one thing. The other thing is the Supreme Court ruled in Missouri v. Biden, Biden v. Missouri in 2022, that the COVID shot could be mandated by hospitals for their workers as long as medical and religious exemptions were provided. So they should not be forcing anybody. They should be able to claim a medical or a religious exemption. If they're not entitled to medical, they should be able to get a religious exemption. That should be their first stop. And we actually have information under the resources tab again on our website, healthfreedomdefense.org, resources, and then you go scroll down to exemptions. And on what you need to say, you do not have to be part of a church or a formal religion. It has to be just that it's your belief. In fact, the Supreme Court's actually ruled that they can't give you some kind of a religious sincerity test. You could think that the sky is covered in pink polka dots, and they have to accept it. They can't fight it. They may try, so you have to have resolve, but this is the law. So please reach out, because we need people like you to help support us and submit testimony or participate in the hearings when we go in January to strike this, okay? What's your name, ma'am?
My name is Holly Springer.
Okay. Please email us, okay?
Hi, from a fellow Armenian from California, but moving to Texas very soon. I just was wondering, so I've been noticing a trend in local politics that I wonder if you've also been noticing in terms of, so I was trying to make a change on the local level, city council, and noticed that when I did a little digging into our mayor, who just landed into our city out of nowhere about 10 years ago, he's a former Federal Reserve employee, spent 20 years in China, and has suddenly come in and completely just transformed our city into something that it wasn't a very short time ago. And I'm just wondering if you've noticed the same trend, and how do you kind of fight the, anti-Americanism that has sort of infiltrated various states?
Yeah. So this is happening everywhere. There are people who are being parachuted into communities across the country and then, touted as leaders, and they're propped up by the machine, by the media, and all this stuff. This is absolutely happening. In northern Idaho, a few years back, I remember there was some kind of a town meeting, and there was some big debate going on, and some of my friends were there, and they were talking to some people, and they said that they had been given hundreds of thousands of dollars, I think $300,000, by some organization affiliated with the Soros Open Society Foundation to move to Idaho to turn it purple. So they're actually, this is like unbelievable subversion, right? Of course, what they're teaching our children, all this stuff. So this is happening in the communities and then the leadership. Absolutely. What do we do? Well, why are we in this mess? How many Americans, how many of us have ever been to a school board meeting before 5 years ago? Okay, not many of us. How many attend city council meetings? But before 5 years ago, right? A few, but this is what's happened. Americans have become apathetic. And it's a Western thing. We're pretty comfortable, kind of fat and happy in some ways, right? In some ways as well, working so hard now as our quality of life is being undermined just to stay neutral, right? It's so hard to raise children, to fund their activities and do all these things. Most Americans have a couple $100s in the bank. It's really hard. I know it's not easy to show up, but this is what's happened, is that we have taken our eye off the ball for a century, and now we're in dire straits. And major change is coming. And so I think the only way that we rectify this is by engaging. We have to completely do the opposite of what we did for decades. I mean, my parents never went anywhere or did anything. Like, you can't trust those people, whatever. Well, if you can't trust them, then we need to go and stop them. But we've been so disaffected. We have to engage. So that's what you do. Run for school board, show up to the meeting, call them out, write letters to your local newspaper, run for city council, bring legislation, meet with your legislators. You have to do this. They have to know that you are watching.
Yes. Thank you, Leslie, for inspiring us. Let's give her another hand. And we'll see you later this afternoon. Enjoy.